This is the Voice of Russia. The London Bureau of the Voice of Russia is now live on digital radio and online, with news, comment and debate on weekdays between 4 and 7 p.m.
You're listening to the Voice of Russia in London. This is Alice Lanyardo. This week is the London Book Fair, as well as being the Slovo-Russian Literature Festival, so the city is full of Russian publishers and writers. Maxim Hodak runs Glagoslav Publishers, which says its main task is to bring out English translations of Russian, Belarusian and Ukrainian books that embody values that are uniquely Slavic in nature. I invited Maxim into our studio and started by asking him what this means.
We actually thought of showing to the world that there are three countries which have similar origins, which go back to at least 1,000 years before, when Orthodoxy was introduced into this region. Before that, there were tribes living in these regions which are Slavs. We wanted to start from there, to step over the recent past and the divisions which it brought towards these regions, which we see now, and to bring books from Russia, Ukraine and Belarus, the three Slavic nations, to the West, and to show the writers from these regions which are modern and which can show to the world what these countries actually are now. Eventually to explain to the West that there is more than politics in these regions, and there are more subjects to address and to disclose to the West. This is our departing point. We've started with major modern writers, which we presented this week at the London Book Fair. This is The Time of Women by Yelena Chizhova, the winner of the Russian Booker Prize, and Zakhar Prilepin. This book, it won 2 prizes, and it was proclaimed as the book of the decade in Russia.
Now, I want to come back to those 2 books, but before we go into them in more detail, what's the state of Russian reading and writing today? Has reading come back? There seems to be so much literature coming out of Russia in English now.
If I understood you correctly, you've mentioned that there is a lot of literature coming out in English from Russia. Actually, the reason why we established Glagoslav Publication is to fill in this gap. From our observation, there are 10 to 15 books translated worldwide per year in English language, and they are not marketed or not marketed well, and they don't reach the audience. This is what we want to turn around and to solve this issue.
Do Russians still read a lot and write a lot?
Yes, and this is a very reading culture. It has its roots in Russian classics. We've been raised on these books.
But is that a bit of a myth? Because, you know, we always hear that Russians read a lot, but when you go to Moscow now, people are reading Heat magazine on the metro and detective novels just like they are doing here.
Actually, there is a very strong penetration of the Western culture in Russia. My generation buys and uses iPhones, iPads as much as London does. But there are 2 sides to the reality of reading in Russia. People are confronted with the new technological age, but at the same time, you cannot go completely away from your roots and from how you grew up and with what you grew up. So actually, my observation is that people still read and still read a lot. There are 150,000 different titles which are published each year in Russia, and there are a lot of translations from the Western languages into Russian. People read and people consume, and there is a market, and it's one of the biggest markets in the world, I think.
And do British readers have an appetite for new Russian literature?
I think it's also something that you cannot say concretely, because there are always people that are interested in Russia, and they will always read books from there, and they are interested in what modern Russia produces now, what modern Russian writers produce now. But we see that we have to educate the market and to educate the new reader. in the sense that people are still living in the masses, the general public still sees Russia as a communistic country, socialistic country. They are still in these stereotypes which are very common to think of by Western people, and we want to break through these stereotypes. Russia is changing, and we want to show to the world this change through literature, because through literature you can indeed show more than the headlines of the newspapers and magazines.
What do these two books you've brought today show us then in terms of reflecting modern Russian thought or values?
I think what I wanted to address, and what these books also carry in them, is that there is something particular to Russia which is not yet known and which does not exist in the West. It's the spirit, the spirituality of Russia, of Slavic nations, which is unknown in the West due to different political reasons, due to the fact that for the past 75 years religion and spirituality was completely forbidden. Since the last 20 years there is an enormous revival in spiritual thought, in spirituality, in orthodoxy, in Orthodox Christianity in all these three countries. On the contrary, we see in the West a decline in interest in the same field. And you can see that while the writers nowadays, they are seeking to regain back this understanding of their roots and their identity. This spirituality, this Orthodox spirituality, is not reflected directly in the books, but you could see that the writers are seeking that and try to picture that and how it's being understood today by modern Russians.
So that's more of a pull for them, of an interest than politics, really?
Yes, I think, of course, there are writers that address politics, and Prilepin is very politically engaged, but at the same time his book is called Sin, and he shows this part of internal struggle.
What's it about, the book?
It's about a guy called Zakharka, who is a young, strong guy in love and with life, random telling moments. In the episodes of his life presented in this book, they are presented in a non-chronological order. We see this guy as a little boy, as a love-lorn teenager, as a hard-drinking grave digger, as a nightclub bouncer, as a father, as a soldier at Chechnya. It's a novel in stories, which, as I've mentioned already, shortly became a literary phenomenon in Russia.
What do you mean a novel in stories?
It's every story addresses a different theme, a different part in life of the central figure, Zakharka, and addresses a different issue of Russian life at this moment.
Is it a book that's hopeful in the end?
Yes. At the end, it shows to the world that there is love, and for that we must strive. And it brings a lot of new insights into what modern Russia at this moment is, what normal, regular people are.
Is it very hard to be a writer in modern Russia now? Is it difficult to get published or to survive financially?
I think this is slightly similar situation as in the West. It's always difficult to live on writing. It's not an easy task, but they have, I think, writers, they're increasingly gaining a voice in Russia, and they can describe and tell to the public, to the population, to show to them the reality of their condition, and probably some of them will be able to show the way out, which this country actually needs at this moment in order to go onwards and to forget its very painful past.
You also publish books from Ukraine and Belarus. Now, lots of people in the United Kingdom don't even know where Belarus is, so it's rather exciting to have Belarusian writers being published in English, which I believe is pretty much for the first time. Isn't that right?
Yes, it's actually for the first time. Of course, one or two writers have been published at some point.
And what are young Belarusian writers writing about? Are they different from the Russians? What kind of things attract them?
I think with Belarus it's a different, difficult situation due to its very hard political situation at the moment. You have writers which are part of the system and writers which are not part of it. And they write about the very difficult conditions within the country. We want to actually picture not only this, but to start from the beginning and to show what this part of the world is, what its history is. This is why we start from the history of Belarus, a neutral book, which just pictures its past until today, until now. And then we would like to start from the very beginning. We want to publish not only modern writers, but also classical writers from this region. Some of them were very successful at that time.
Is there something particular about Belarusian writing that makes it stand out, or is that a bit difficult to say?
I think Belarus, as Western Ukraine, it's on the edge between the West and the East, and it was also the influence of Catholicism in the country is much greater and stronger, was much greater and stronger than, for example, in Russia. And due to this, was influenced by Western countries, and due to this, it has a slightly different spirit, and that spirit we would like also to show and to disclose to the Western public. Their writings are different due to their different history.
And the young ones, are they writing in an absurdist fashion? Are they going for reality? What kind of things are the young writers tackling?
I think just as Ukrainian writers, Belarusian, it's a post-modernistic style mostly, and they are trying to describe their lives and the lives that are lived by their contemporaries. That, I think, is where we should start before also addressing, probably some of them are and will write about issues which are common to all humankind. Universal values.
Are they as good, do you think, as the Russians? You know, have you got some serious writers coming out of Belarus and Ukraine?
Actually, there is one which we are considering. I will not name her yet because we are still discussing the conditions and the possibility to publish her. They win prizes. They win also prizes in Western Europe, and they are very serious writers which could be looked at.
So lots to look forward to then.
Yes, absolutely. We'll be bringing about 35 books in the coming 1 to 2 years.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. That was Maxim Hodak, director of the Glagoslav Publishing House, talking to me, Alice Lanyardo. Stay with us.